Okay, the third of these city profiles is for Paris. And the reason that we're talking about Paris is because, similar to London, it is a city of great contrast in terms of its landscape, in terms of the way in which GI is centred and placed around the city, in terms of its scale, in terms of its value, in terms of its functionality. And this has changed over time, and because of that, you see a varied engagement in some places with the landscape, depending on culture, depending on heritage, depending on tenure in the city. But we've also seen some quite interesting and novel approaches by the Parisian city government and people in Paris in terms of looking at how they can invest in GI, be it through creating the world's biggest urban agricultural plot across the city on city roofs, in terms of the participatory budget and allocating funds that people have identified from the city for GI, or just the way in which it's manifested itself as this city that is green and cultured, using boulevards and using street trees and using key pinch points for big parks as a way of structuring the city. So again, if we're thinking about these variables, we can talk about the way in which the socio-cultural aspects of parks and GI in Paris is quite formative, and the fact that there is a culture of being outside, of being in parks, either to go for a coffee, to go and play with your kids, take a dog for a walk, to be seen. But this also plays into the politics of the city and the way in which the different arrondissements are managed. So depending on the population, the structure of the demographics, you might see far more rigid adherence to a very formalised form of management, whereas in other locations you might see a more varied set of management practice or development depending on what the local community is. And we've talked about some of these previously. We can also talk about the size and the scale of GI in the city. So it has the two bois, the two forests at either side of the city, the Bois de Boulogne and the Bois de Vincennes, which act as the lungs of the city. And then you have a network of green spaces, large parks and small spaces, which move towards the city centre and along the River Seine. So in terms of a network, it's got quite a visible set of large spaces, which is not necessarily as well developed as the GI in London, but it is still quite developed for a European city. There's also quite a lot of interest in climate change and air pollution in Paris, and they're looking at shutting off roads on Sundays and in various months to allow people to walk down the avenues, so particularly the avenues around the Arc de Triomphe. And they're talking about the way in which people access and benefit these sites, either for their everyday users or if they're tourists. So there's a lot of different aspects here to London and to Manchester, but also a lot of comparability, which you might want to think about. And if we think about the way in which GI is structured in Paris, we can see a lot of variation in the way in which GI has been used to redevelop sites, such as the Parc de Villette in the top left, the way in which they're using existing railway infrastructure to redevelop linear parks. So the Planté de Promenade, the picture in the middle, which was the precursor to the High Line in New York. And again, it's about a mile long. It's a linear feature that has a park that's at a first story level and actually goes through apartment blocks and has a variety of walkways and then parks on it as well. The picture in the top right is the Parc de Luxembourg, and again a very classic quintessential Parisian site. People outside having coffee, watching other people in a very formalised and designed space. So you've got this variety of structural change, of diversity in terms of what GI is there. And this is reflective of the different eras that GI has been developed in within the city. So there was the Baron Haussmann redevelopment of the boulevards to make all the grand avenues, and along with that came some of these larger parks, such as the Parc de Bercy and the Parc de Luxembourg. But you also get more modernist or more contemporary ideas, such as the Parc de la Villette in the top left. Also, because of the grand nature of a lot of Parisian architecture, so this is the Gare de l'Est in the centre east of Paris. You get these smaller spaces of greening outside the front. So you've got some infill, you've got some sort of development of GI as a stopgap in these certain areas. You've got these grand design parks, which actually have that centralised structure of the main boulevard, and then different avenues going, normally a water feature as well. And you've got things which are a little bit more contemporary in terms of the Promenade Planté and the Parc de la Villette. But if you also think about Paris more broadly, you can start to think about the way in which GI has been instrumental in shaping the visuals and the aesthetics of some of the bigger tourist attractions. So the top right is just at the top, the midpoint of the Sacré-Cœur, looking out into the city, but then you've got the cathedral behind you. But the nature of the green infrastructure there as a way of entrance into the site and opening it up into this grand vista, and the fact that you have the trees at the bottom sort of screening the other apartments with this central avenue point is quite classical in terms of its design. The picture at the bottom is one of the main canals going through the city. It goes up towards the northern arrondissement and the Parc de la Villette, and water is used heavily in Paris as a way of structuring engagement with the landscape. So along the Seine and along these canals, there are lots and lots of different parks, different ways in which people can use it, be it for active transport, for commuting, or for recreation. And this one is particularly busy in the evenings, with people just sitting outside, having a drink and talking to their friends. The other two pictures are, again, sort of quite quintessential in terms of Parisian GI. You've got the Parc de Citron in the top left there, which was the former Citroën car manufacturing plant, which is a quite futuristic site with a lot of different avenues and a lot of space there for multiple groups to use it at the same time. This was taken about midday, maybe 1 in the afternoon. Lots of school kids there having a picnic in the park. But it also has quite formal planting. It has more adventurous sort of woodland areas to the left of this image, and a water feature at the top. And then the picture at the bottom left is it marries with the picture at the bottom right. It's just across the water from it, and it's just a small piece of grass, a small pocket park located within a residential district. And one of the key things about parks in Paris is that they are part of those communities, and people use them quite extensively. So people may travel to the bigger sites, be it the Parc de Citron there or the Parc de Luxembourg, but they will use local spaces. And this is quite fundamental in the way in which they're managed in Paris, because each of the arrondissements has a way of looking for funding and for managing their local GI, which sits within that broader city-scale discussion. And if you move out to the Ile-de-France sort of region, you start to see these green spikes going into the city. So there's quite an interesting scaled view about how Paris reflects and looks at GI. And part of this is because people are strong advocates for GI and its use. Part of it is because they are in some cases the only green spaces locally, particularly in terms of the quite built up areas where you might have one park for a different district. And in many cases it reflects the role of GI as a regenerative tool in Paris, because it's used in a way to allow spaces to be repurposed and to provide them with a value. So a lot of it is about socio-cultural understanding and about use and recreation. Some of it is about repurposing derelict sites, and some of it is about thinking about Paris as a more holistic and sustainable place. So Paris is an interesting location because it's gone through a series of developments and redevelopments of GI, which is maybe more strategic in some ways and more reflective in others than in many cities where they've just been, what's the new thing? Here there seems to be a continuity between the design, the location, the linking together, which is more purposeful than in other locations. Again, I hope this is useful, and there's lots of reading on Paris and GI, particularly the Promenade Planté and some of the bigger sites, which is worth checking out if you are interested. Okay, thank you.